Dear students, the topic of our lecture is Law and Social Transformation Pre-Independence. The topic which we are going to cover, the first is meaning of the term law, then the social transformation, what is the meaning of social transformation, what are the theories behind the social transformation, then we will discuss the evolutionary theory, then we will take the functionalist theory, and lastly the third theory, that is the conflict theory. After discussing the theories of social transformation, we will take the major pre-independence legislation which has brought the social transformation in India. So next is, what is the meaning of social transformation? So social transformation, it is a process which leads to the fundamental change in the society. It is a process which alters the individual's behavior as well as social status, by which the society's reformation, it is also there. It leads to the cultural reformation as well as the transformation in the living of the society. Whenever there is a social transformation, in this process, firstly the change occurs in the basic unit of the society, that is your individual, and after the change in the basic unit of the society, there is a major change in the social system also, because social system, it is the composition, the main composition of the social system are the individuals. So when there is a fundamental change in the individual, then that fundamental change, it also leads to the change in the social system. So in the process of transformation, always the society moves from the traditional structure towards the modern structure. And in the social transformation, step by step, the society, it is moving towards the modernization. So it is a process by which fundamental change, it is there in the society, and it leads to the development of society, and the particular society moves from the traditional or the primitive stage towards the modernization. So next is, what is the meaning of social transformation? So social transformation, it is a process which leads to the fundamental change in the society. It is a process which alters the individual's behavior as well as social status, by which the society's reformation, it is also there. It leads to the cultural reformation as well as the transformation in the living of the society. Whenever there is a social transformation, in this process, firstly the change occurs in the basic unit of the society, that is your individual, and after the change in the basic unit of the society, there is a major change in the social system also, because social system, it is the composition, the main composition of the social system are the individuals. So when there is a fundamental change in the individual, then that fundamental change, it also leads to the change in the social system. So in the process of transformation, always the society moves from the traditional structure towards the modern structure. And in the social transformation, step by step, the society, it is moving towards the modernization. So it is a process by which fundamental change, it is there in the society, and it leads to the development of society, and the particular society moves from the traditional or the primitive stage towards the modernization. So next is theories of social transformation. There are three basic philosophies of the social transformation, or the three basic theories of social transformation are there. First is evolutionary theory, then the second is functionalist theory, and the last is the conflict theory. So firstly we will discuss the evolutionary theory. The evolutionary theory, it is based upon the Charles Darwinian principle of biological evolution. So the Darwin has given the biological evolution theory that there will be the survival of fittest, and this particular theory, it is also, they have made applicable, sociologists have made this theory applicable to the social change also, that the society, it always moves in a specific direction. There are certain stages by which the society, it passes to higher and higher level of the progression, and whenever there is a higher and higher level of the progression, uh, at the same pace, the law, it also develops in the society. And when the law, it is also developed, it leads to some cultural attitudes as well as behaviors. And these cultural attitudes and behaviors, they are also reflected in the laws which are made by the people of that society. So whenever there is a development, there is a social evolution, the particular level of the society, it also get progressive, and for that progressiveness, there is a need of new laws, and these particular laws they are also created. For example, there are so many research and development in different society. Now, if you see the atomic energy, they are used for making the atomic bombs, and there are so many complexity in the arms and ammunitions. So, with the development in the science and technology, the laws they are also developing new type of laws of warfare, as well as the uh, laws relating to provision of the atomic weapons, as well as the laws relating to the provision of the chemical weapons, landmines, and the other things. They are also included in the society. Initially, when the traditional wars are there, these type of laws they are not prevailing. So when the evolution it is there in the science and technology also, thus social norms and culture, attitudes and behaviors they also get changed, for which there is a need of new type of the legislations also, new type of the treaties also. That's why whenever there is a evolution of the society, there is a progress of the society, higher and complex laws they are also needed, and new piece of legislations they are also passed. So in the evolutionary theory, the sociologist is saying that with the social change, whenever the society it progresses from one level to the other level, the laws they also progress with the society. They are also developed with the society. So next is the thoughts under evolutionary theory. Under evolutionary theory also, there are the two type of the thoughts. The one is unilinear evolutionary theory and the second is multilinear evolutionary theory. The unilinear evolutionary theory, it is expounded by and it is also supported by Comte, Durkheim and Spencer. They have proposed this theory, and according to them, all the society they used to pass from the same sequence of the development stages, and they lead to the ultimate the progress society. So all the types of society always they goes from the primitive society and they reach up to a particular limit of modernization. So they are saying that all the society they pass through a similar linear sequence of the stage of evolution, and similarly the law also passes the similar sequence of the evolution. So the second thought is there, that is the multilinear evolutionary theory. So in case of the multilinear evolutionary theory, they are saying the social change it is not a linear process, it is a unilinear process and it moves in the different directions. So multilinear theories they observe that human society it always evolved in the different lines, and on the basis of those different lines, the lines they are created due to the difference in their resources as well as the space of the development. And similarly the law also develop at a different pace in the society. There cannot be the similar type of law development in the society also. The second theory of the social transformation, it is the functionalist theory. The functionalist theory, it is given by the Parson, and in the functionalist theory, the main emphasis it is upon the function of the law. What is the function of the law? To solve the social problems. So the Parson has explained that in a particular country, when there is a significant social problem, it leads to the temporary shift in the social order, due to which there is always a need of new type of law, and this law it is needed in order to create the equilibrium and to maintain the previous social order and tranquility. So the Parson had also given the equilibrium theory within the functionalist theory, and according to that, there is a social change. Whenever there is a social change of one aspect of society, this particular social change of one aspect, it always requires the adjustment or the equilibrium in the other aspect. So whenever there is a adjustment, then in that case the equilibrium it has to be there in order to maintain the social order. And if adjustment does not occur, there will be the lack of equilibrium and the social order get threatens. So the Parson has given the equilibrium theory, and the Parson has emphasized that in order to be secure the stability and the balance in the society, there must be the new type of laws to be created, as well as there must be the new amendments which are to be introduced in the law. So according to functionalist theory, there is the function of law, that is the social problems it must be solved. So whenever there is a accrual or whenever there is a new problem in the society, those new problems in the social society they are going to be checked, as well as they are going to be uh, solved by the formation of new laws as well as by the amendment in the laws. So the social problem, it leads to the formation of new laws. So the third theory is the conflict theory. The conflict theory is given by Karl Marx. So Karl Marx has explained that the society, it is always in a continuous state of the conflict, and this continuous state of conflict, it is because of the competition for the limited resources. Because in the state there will be the limited resources, and always in the society there will be conflict to acquire it. All the people, they want to acquire it, so society, it is always in a state of perpetual conflict. So the conflict theory, it also says that the social ordering, it is maintained by the dominant power. The persons who are having the more resources, who have acquired the more resources, rather than any particular consensus or rather than any particular public opinion of those who are having the limited resources. So according to the conflict theory, society, it is always divided into two parts. The one is the particular class which is acquiring more and more resources, and the second is the class which is having the limited resources. So the wealthy people, they are always in the power, and they will make the uh, laws which are going to be gone over the poor and powerless people. So the poor and powerless people, they are more and more suppressed by the rule and regulations which are made by the wealthy people. The basic premise of the conflict theory is that the individual or the groups within the society, they will always work to maximize their wealth and the power, because every individual is having a basic instinct of self-preservation, of self-acquiring or self-enrichment, due to which more and more power as well as more and more resources uh, dominant class want to achieve. What is the result of that? The result is there will be the laws. The laws will be more favoring to the people who are more wealthy and powerful, and the people who are poor and powerless, they will not be considered, as well as social security laws is lacking in these type of society, which are in the perpetual conflict due to the competition to the limited resources. So in these type of societies, the social transformation, it is always in the favor of the wealthy people. And if actual social transformation, it is required uh, in order to decline the gap between the two classes, then in that case, the social security legislation, they are to be introduced. And again, as per the Karl Marx, these legislations, they are in the hand of the powerful people only, on their wish only, whether they actually want the revolution in the society or not. So in these type of societies, the social transformation, it is as per the wish of the wealthy people, the dominant class. Second is our lag law. Lag law, it is the law which is made in reaction to the social problem or in reactions to the social conflicts which already existing in the society. Whenever there is a particular conflict in the society and there is a need or emergence of new type of principles or the rules to regulate those type of situations, in those situations new effective laws as well as uh, new amendments, they are brought into consideration. All these new legislations and the amendments, they give rise to the term lag law. Lag law means which is lagging behind. Firstly, there will be the social change or the social transformation, and in order to equalize it, in order to cope it, there will be the formation of law to tackle it. So these type of laws which are the outcome of the social problems or the conflicts, that is known as lag law. So next we will discuss what are the types of law. So on the basis of the social transformation or the relation of law and the social transformation, the law, it is always talked or categorized into two ways. The one is lead law and the second is lag law. So the first, here we are discussing the lead law. So lead law is the law which determines the nature as well as the directions in which the society, it is going to be moved. So according to Roscoe, the law, it is always perceived as an instrument of social engineering. There is always a law which will develop the particular nature of the society, which will lead to the change in the society also. There are certain particular norms which are set up, And on the basis of these principles and norms, the human conduct as well as human practices, they are also changed. And when for the large period of time these norms they are followed and human practices they are changed, it leads to the human transformation also. So lead law is the law which is formulated first and then it leads to the social change. So now we will discuss what are the different pre-independence legislations and how these legislations they have brought the major social change in India. So first we will discuss the Charter of 1600. You all are knowing the Charter of 1600. It deals with the empowerment of the East India Company to have the trade in India or other geographical areas. By passing of this charter, the East India Company they are legalized to have the trade in the India, Africa, America also. After discussing the Charter of 1600, I will then take the Charter of 1726. Then Regulation Act of 1773 we are going to discuss. Then the next charter is of 1861. This act has this charter has established the high courts in the three presidency towns. Then there will be the Government of India Act 1935. The Government of India Act 1935 it is very important because it has also changed the unitary system of the Indian government to the federal one. Then after that I will take the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act of 1856. This act it has also legalized the concept of the widow remarriage in the Hindu society and it is also a very progressive legislation. Then after that we will take the Bengal Sati Regulation Act 1829. So Bengal Sati Regulation Act it is also very important because it is the first legislation that has prohibited the sati system in India. Then we will take Indian Penal Code. Then the last we will discuss the Indian Contract Act. So these are some major pre-independence legislations which I am going to discuss in this class, and I am just going to take the reflection that how these particular acts and charters they have totally changed the Indian society towards a progressive society. That what the major changes these particular acts they have made in the Indian legal history. The first is Charter of 1600. The Queen Elizabeth has passed the Charter of 1600. By the Charter of 1600, the East India Company with the title the Governor and the Company of the Merchants of London trading into East Indies it was incorporated on 31st December 1600 by Charter of Queen Elizabeth. So what are the main provisions of this charter? That the company, East India Company, it will have the lifespan of the 15 years and even the charter has explained the revocation also. That the charter could be revoked also on 2 years notice for all. So the geographical limit of the East India Company, the geographical limit of trading of East India Company, it was also prescribed in the charter. The India, Asia, Africa and America, they falls within their geographical limits and without the license of the company, no British subject is allowed to carry out the trade. And if there is any unauthorized trading in the geographical limits of East India Company, then the trader is liable for the forfeiture of the ships and the uh, merchandise. So these are the main provisions of the Charter of 1600, and the Charter of 1600 has empowered the East India Company to carry out the trade in the different geographical limits, and the resultant is that the East India Company has set up the ports at the Surat in India. So second charter is Charter of 1726. The King George I, they have issued the first charter to the company, that is the Charter of 1726. The Charter of 1726, it is actually made in order to request to get more powers from the Crown in India. So under the Charter of 1726, the Crown it was requested to make a uniform judicial system for all the three presidency towns, and by the Charter of 1726 not only the uniform judicial system it was requested, as well as there is the establishment of the civil and the criminal courts in each presidency towns, but these civil and criminal courts in each presidency towns they are deriving their authority, their power from the crown. They are designated as the royal courts, and these courts, they are almost have the equivalent power as the English courts in all their particular jurisdiction and all the other aspects. And the appeal from these particular courts, if the parties they are dissatisfied by the decision given by these royal courts, then the appeal they directly move to the Privy Council. So this is the Charter of 1726 by which the King George I, they actually desire the uniform judicial system for the presidency towns, under which the establishment of the civil and criminal court it was done in the presidency towns. They are designated as the royal courts, and they all are having the equivalent powers as the English courts. And all the decisions which are given by the English court, by the your royal courts, the appeal from those decisions, then they can go directly to the Privy Council. So the next is Regulating Act of 1773. The Regulating Act of 1773, it was a act which was passed and it is having a very great constitutional importance, as it was the first step which is taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company in India. It also recognized the political and administrative functions of the company for the first time in India. It was the first direct interference which is made by the British government in the affairs of India. Its main purpose it was to take step forward, removing the political powers from the hands of trading company. The president of the company's Calcutta factory, who was used to be governor of the Bengal, it was made the governor general of all Indian territories of the company, and 4 other councillors were also appointed at Fort William. So the Regulating Act of 1773, it was the first attempt to separate the political powers from the judicial organs also. It has created the separate and independent judicial organs, and these separate judicial organs now they are not under the direct control of the king. So it is a major particular act which has given the powers in the hand of the Governor General and the 4 councillors of all the territories of the India, as well as it is a first attempt to create an independent as well as separate judicial organ in India. And this is the particular act which gave rise to the concept of the independence of judiciary also, the separation of powers also, which is imbibed in the constitution itself. So now the Indian judicial system of that time, it was totally independent, and there is no direct control of the king on the functioning of the courts. So the Regulation Act, it has brought the major changes in the structure of company by the appointment of the Governor General as well as by separating the judicial organs from the control of the king. Now we will discuss the Government of India Act 1935. This is also very important act. This act has totally changed the structure of the government, and the structure of government it was changed from the unitary to the federal one. So now they are the creation of the federal courts. So next we will discuss the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act 1856. In the Hindu society, the upper caste Hindu, they used to disallow the Hindu widows to remarry in order to preserve their family honor as well as in order to preserve the property also. So the upper class of the Hindus, they used to prohibit the practice of the widow remarriage as well as they subjected the widows to the sati system also. So these are the 2 evils which are prevailing in the Hindu society, that the widows they are not allowed to get remarried as well as they are subjected to the sati. So Hindu Widow Remarriage Act it was passed in the year 1856, and the main objective behind the passing of this act was to allow the remarriage of the Hindu widows in all the jurisdiction of India, and this act it was passed under the East India Company rule in order to provide the basic right of choosing the spouse to the widows in the Hindu upper class society. So this is very progressive legislation. It has given the right to the widows that if they want, they can remarry, and they are not subjected to the sati system also. So one more evil is there in the Indian society. Along with the provision of widow remarriage, there is also one major evil which is prevailing in the Indian society, that there is a system of the sati. The women, they used to offer themselves to the fire of the husband, and this concept, it is prevailing because the women, they have not acknowledged as a different individual. They don't have any identity different from their husband. Even the women, they are also having the same type of the vision that they loses their identity at the death of their husband, so they used to offer themselves to the fire. But this practice, it is totally against the human feelings, as well as it is a revolt to the human feeling, and everybody is having a right to life. That's why on 14th of December 1892, the British Parliament, by Governor General Lord William Bentinck, the Bengal Sati Regulation Act of 1829, it was passed. This act, it was passed in order to declare the practice of sati as illegal in all the jurisdiction of India. So all the jamidars and lakhiras, their orders that immediately they have to inform the nearest police station that if there is any apprehension of the commission of sati. But if this fails to do so, then in that case they are subjected to the penalty also, as well as all the people who are involved in the that instance of the sati, that they all are also subjected to punishment. So this is also a progressive legislation, and initially it was not accepted by the society because the people, they are of the belief that the woman, they loses her identity, as well as they don't want that the woman to live in order to claim any other property right in the ancestral property. So this evil, it was totally eradicated by the passing of Bengal Sati Regulation Act of 1829. So next is the Indian Penal Code 1860. The Indian Penal Code 1860, it is an act which is made with an objective to create a journal penal code which will describe all the offences, what are the different elements of the offences, and what will be the punishment for it. It is a consolidated act which exhaustively deals with the different type of offences, how they are categorized. For example, the offences against the property, offences against the person, offences against state, etc. The categorization that is also given, as well as it has specifically uh, exhaustively given the quantum of the punishment, the maximum as well as the minimum punishment to which the person will be subjected if that person commit a particular offense. So it is the initial effort which is done by the British Parliament to codify the penal law in order to make a comprehensive written law that what will be the offences to be there in India and what will be the punishment if any person they commit the particular offence. It is enacted by the Imperial Legislative Council on 6th of October 1860 and it came force on 1st January 1862. So this is the very progressive legislation. They just want to have a comprehensive act in order to make it clear that what acts are prohibited in India, what will be coming within the terminology of offences, and what will be the minimum and maximum quantum of punishment for committing such an offence. One more progressive legislation which is passed by the British Parliament for India, that is Indian Contract Act 1872. This act, it is based on the English common system, and it is the act which actually describe the various stage of formation of the contract, how the valid contract it is going to be formed, and it also describes the limiting principles. What are the limiting principles according to which the parties to the contract they can create their mutual rights and obligation. So the objective behind the passing of Indian Contract Act 1872, it is to prescribe the general rules and principles under which the different type of contracts can be made in India.